Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to the second episode of the Fellowship series by Plant. Please note that towards the end of the session, we will also be having a Q&A session. I would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box that will appear on the right side of your YouTube screens. Today, Radhika Saxena, who graduated from Campus Law Center, University of Delhi in 2015, and then also went on to secure her LLM from the University of Pennsylvania Law School in 2019. She was also awarded the prestigious Arthur C. Helton Fellowship in 2019 and served as an International Legal Fellow at the Women Enabled International Incorporation. She currently works as an advocacy coordinator at SEWA Bharat. In this session, Radhika will be speaking in detail about the Arthur C. Helton Fellowship. I would now like to hand it over to Radhika to conduct the session.
Thanks, Abhishek, and thank you to Plant for having me on today for this session. I really appreciate the effort that you're making with the fellowship series because I think we as law students need to know more about these opportunities, and I think especially opportunities relating to the field of international law and international human rights are hard to come by. So thank you for doing this and thank you for having me. So just a quick sort of introduction about how I'm planning to go ahead with this session. So I'll be addressing some questions, like common questions about the fellowship for about the first 20 to 25 minutes, after which I'd be happy to take questions from the audience. And with that said, I'll just begin. So I'll start with telling you about what the Arthur C. Helton Fellowship is. So it is a fellowship that is run by the American Society of International Law. So that means that the fellowship is based or rather encourages work in international law. Arthur C. Helton was a human rights advocate, and he unfortunately died while he was on humanitarian work in Baghdad. And he was also an ASIL member. So through contributions from ASIL members, this fellowship has been set up. It's a micro grant of 2,000 US dollars, and it enables you to work anywhere in the world, but in the field of international law, because, like I said earlier, it's sort of created by the American Society of International Law. Now, since Arthur C. Helton was a human rights advocate, the fellowship does prioritize applications that focus on human rights, but I think they look very favorably at applications that are looking to work in the area of humanitarian law, international humanitarian law, and also international criminal law. So that's a little bit about what the fellowship is. So who can apply for this fellowship? Ideally, the fellowship is meant for law students or young lawyers. And by young lawyers, I mean lawyers who are not more than 3 years into their profession. I mean, this is just maybe some context here I'd like to provide is that a lot of these fellowships, what you need to do is to find a sponsoring organization. And you can either design a project with the sponsoring organization, or the sponsoring organization can already have a program running which you can join, and you can so I mean you can design a long-term project also, 6 months to a year. You could also just design like a short 2-month program as an intern. It really depends on what your goals are and how what kind of experience you want to gain out of the fellowship, and how you can utilize those 2,000 US dollars that you basically get from the fellowship. In my case, I use this fellowship to work at Women Enabled International, which is an NGO based in Washington, D.C. and New York, and they do advocacy, international legal advocacy at the intersection of women's rights and disability rights. And it was a long term fellowship for me, which meant that I had to find other sources of funding. And together with all the sources of funding that I had, I pursued this fellowship. Moving on, when to apply? So the fellowship opens up its application, I think, sometime in December end or January, and usually the deadline is between the last week of January and the first week of February. And it's really like I would call, I think, for the lack of a better word, I would call the process a little opaque, in the sense that once I did apply, I did not really hear back from them. There was no interview, there was no update of whether my application was processed or really what stage we were at, till I basically heard from them sometime in mid March, I believe it was 16th March, about the status of the fellowship, and which was that I had been awarded the fellowship. You need a resume, a writing sample, preferably on a subject of international law, a project proposal of sorts. So, like I said, you can design that with a sponsoring organization. You need a letter from the sponsoring organization, saying that they are happy to have you on board, and how your work through the fellowship would contribute to international law, to the development of international law, rather. You also need to submit proof that you are in affiliated with an academic institution. And this is where I think the process personally for me gets a little murky, because the fellowship is for young professionals as well, but young professionals would not be able to provide a copy of their ID card or any other document to say that they have any academic affiliation. So this part of the process, I think, is a little murky to me as well. But that said, I think ASIL is very, very responsive, and if you do write to them about any of these issues, they would be able to help you out. The only thing I would say is that you should start early, so that in case there is a delay in getting back to you, you're not held up because of it, and you don't lose out on the application deadline because of that reason. I think these are the main documents you need. You also need two letters of support from, or rather, letters of recommendation. You can choose who these individuals can be. In my case, they were two of my professors from the University of Pennsylvania. Moving on. So this, since it's sort of like a micro grant and you design everything on your own, getting the fellowship in itself doesn't necessarily equip you with any skills. Really, it's about the skills that you develop through the project that you work on, or the contributions that you make to the project, which eventually lead to the development of international law or any particular aspect of international law. But it does offer you a network, which is that of the ASIL, or American Society of International Law. So anybody can really become a member of the American Society of International Law. For students, I believe there's a fee, and that fee is $100, if I'm not wrong. And if you do become a Helton fellowship, that fee is essentially waived, and for the duration of your fellowship, you are an ASIL member. And what that does is that it exposes you to a network of people who are working in the field of international law. And it could really be any field or any area of international law. It's not just restricted to human rights. I mean, ASIL has other branches as well. And you can really use your membership to network. What happens once you do get the fellowship is that there is a sort of annual convention that they have, where they announce the Helton Fellows every year. It's usually in DC. So if you are in the US at the time when you get the fellowship, they invite you to attend the annual meeting. And if not, I'm not sure if they make a webcast available for you to watch. But nevertheless, if you are physically present in the US, you can go and attend it, and you can do a lot of in-person networking. But even outside of that, when you become a member of ASIL, you have access to the directory, and you can look up people who have similar interests and email them. And they're, in my experience, they've all been very forthcoming. Of course, I haven't interacted with anybody through the email route. For me, it was more I met them in person first and then pursued them um, through email after I met them. But it is an option given that we live, in a world affected by coronavirus, and almost everything is virtual at this time. Another good thing about being an ASIL member is that they have a lot of working groups which you can join or you can monitor. And they also have a lot of events that they host I believe every week. And so if you are in DC, you can actually physically go and attend these events. I'm not sure how these events are being held right now, whether they're in a virtual format which any member can attend. I'll have to check and get back on that. But these are just some of the advantages of being an ASIL member. And of course, once your fellowship gets over, uh, or rather, I say, your ASIL membership is for a year. So once the membership gets over, you can always renew it, and it would be a little cheaper for you to renew it than if you were taking it up as a, signing up as a member with no prior connection with ASIL. At least that's been my experience. Another good thing about being an ASIL member is that especially I think for people who identify as women, they have a mentoring program or mentorship program called by the Women in International Law Working Group at ASIL. And they pair you up with mentors, and you have like a sort of mentorship pod, and you can have common goals for the group. And really, you can develop your skills, you can set your own personal goals on what you want to achieve out of the mentorship program. So I had the opportunity to be a part of that mentorship program last year, but unfortunately there was some glitch about my membership status, and so I wasn't able to be a part of it last year. So I applied again this year, and I'm again a mentee this year. And I've been just recently I've heard from my mentor, and I got the mentee package as well, and it's a really thought out, really well thought out mentorship program. So these are just some of the benefits of being an ASIL member that come along with the fellowship if you do get it. Um, General tips about the application process. So just make sure that you go over everything there is on the ASIL website about the Helton Fellowship. They have a pretty detailed PDF also, which is available, which lays out everything, right from the documents that you need to any kind of proof that you need to submit. I think one thing I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about what all you need to apply. You also need to submit a project budget, and they do like to give preference to people who can sort of wrap up their project in the either in the $2,000 that ASIL provides, or if they can demonstrate that for the remainder of the project they have other sources of funding. They do sort of give preference to that, but really how they evaluate applications is not something I know. I believe other Helton fellows may also not know. So just start early, think about what you want to do, and I would say start researching a little bit earlier. For me, I got to know about it quite late, and I applied in quite a bit of hurry. But luckily, the sponsoring organization that is women enabled in my case was very helpful, and I was able to quickly turn over the proposal, the application form, the sponsorship letter. But these things take time, so just make sure that you have enough time on hand. Go through their website, start prepping a little earlier. I think your CV and writing statement are things that you can work on in advance and just keep ready. But I would say to find a sponsoring organization, take about 6 months of time to really put some thought into what kind of organizations exist, what are the possibilities for a project, what your interests are, how do they match with the sponsoring organization, getting a letter from them, thinking a little strategically about who should recommend you, what the professors do, if they are professors, if they are industry practitioners, then how well they know you, what kind of control do you have over writing that recommendation letter. Because eventually the recommendation letter has to be submitted by the person who is recommending you and not something that you send along. So those are just some of the things that you want to be considering. So that's it, I think, from me for now about the fellowship, and I am happy to take questions now that you might have.
Thanks a lot for sharing your experience, Radhika. I think that was very informative in itself. I think we have a lot of questions, but I would want to specifically just take one thing up. So I understand that they haven't given a breakup of the weightage that is given to different things in the application process, such as your resume or your writing sample. But from your own experience, what do you think was given the most weightage? Like, do you think it was the resume and writing sample which were given an equal weightage along with your project proposal, or was it just the project proposal?
I think your resume definitely matters, and so does the writing sample. But I think that the bulk of the focus is on the project proposal. And there, like when you look at the application form, there are specific questions about what your project is around and how it will contribute to the development of international law, how it will contribute to your professional growth, and how it will contribute to the work of the sponsoring organization. So I think those are the key questions that a lot of focus and the bulk of attention really is on, or at least that was my experience. And also the sponsoring organization being able to vouch for you and give you a letter to say that we're happy to welcome you to work with us through this ASIL fellowship, and this is how your work with us would contribute both to international law and also to the development of our organization and its ethos in general. So I think that, and also the budget that you send, because it is a micro grant, and $2,000 is really not a lot of money if you are planning a long term fellowship. Also really depends on where the fellowship is. So if it's in the US, $2,000 is not a lot, but if it's in India, $2,000 is quite a big amount. So really depends where you're based, and you want to sort of highlight these things in your application.
All right. So I think one more follow up on the resume writing sample bit. So if I understand correctly, the writing sample is supposed to be about a 10 pages writing piece, which means it's supposed to be fairly comprehensive. But do you think this needs to have any kind of link with the project proposal, or let's just say any concept of international law at large?
So the outer limit for writing samples is 10 pages. That does not mean that it has to be 10 pages. I think my writing sample was around 6 pages, and that too, it was double spaced. So I guess it was around 4 pages if I were to like compress it and make it single space. And I don't think that the writing sample has to be related to the project proposal, because it could just be that you're curious about this specific area of international law, but for more reasons than one, you've just not had the opportunity to work in that area of law. And I think, especially in India, because international law really isn't implemented so much, or really isn't um, like a subject of a lot of writing or discussion or debate on national media, or even, I mean, I really can't say about national law schools, but I think in campus law center it really wasn't for me personally. So it can be hard for you to have like a writing sample on that particular project that you want to be doing. So it just has to be anything that is related to international law. If you can demonstrate some sort of a link between who you are as a person, and what your CV is demonstrating, and how that kind of fits into or leads to the curiosity that you have with the area that you want to work in, then that's great, but it's not necessary. So I'm going to just be a little more specific here. My project that I had designed with Women Enabled International was around legal capacity for women and girls with disability, and also just looking at how legal capacity, what it means, how it impacts women and girls with disability, where the CRPD figures into all of this, how is the CRPD, which is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, how does it like impact lives of people in different nations. And I had picked up a few countries to research, and really, I think it was the project that I designed was because I was curious about intersectionality and women's rights, especially in an international setting, and I didn't have much exposure to it before I went for my LLM. And even like to intersectionality, even just to be very very honest, and I really got the chance to develop that when I was working at Women Enabled through the ASIL fellowship. But the writing sample that I had suggested was something to do with sexual violence and international law. And sexual violence was something that I had worked on in India before I left. So I had litigated for about 3 years before I went for my LLM. So it just sort of, there was some sort of a link between the work I had previously done, how the curiosity was sparked in me, and what I would really make of it while I was doing my fellowship. So that's how I think the application sort of fell in place for me. But that said, like, it's really not necessary. It would always be nice, but it's not really necessary. And because the process is a little opaque, I have no way of knowing whether that worked for me or it didn't. So I don't, I mean, I think it's great if it can organically happen and if you can do that, but it's not necessary.
All right. So I think we have a bunch of questions with respect to the whole idea of a sponsoring organization, since that obviously holds a lot of weight in the fellowship. So I'll just put like two or three of them together. So the first one is, how exactly do you pick a sponsoring organization? And a follow up to that is there any threshold or is there any type of organization that can or cannot be picked, or some kind of thing like, I mean, or is there any kind of criteria that the organization should have been working for X amount of years or done Y things in the market? Is there any threshold?
So there is no threshold as far as I know. But I mean, I could be wrong about that. But so far as I know, there is no threshold. Regarding the first part of the question, as in how do you pick a sponsoring organization? So again, I think a little bit of context here is that I was in the US when I applied for this, and I was still pursuing my LLM degree when I applied for the fellowship. So during my LLM degree, I had gone for a career fair, and at that career fair, I had like already applied in advance to a bunch of jobs and positions, and one of them was this fellowship at Women Enabled International. So I met with them at the fair, and I had an interview with them, and they were interested in working with me, and so together we developed. a sort of proposal after that, and I also applied for fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania, which I eventually did get. So the proposal that we developed sort of helped me seek funding from both ASIL and also Penn Law. And I think this process is very common in the US and outside of India, but I really can't speak about other regions or countries because that's not where I was and that's not what my experience was. But I know of like a few places where this practice is common, and the US is definitely one of them. And a lot of fellowships in the US specifically are unpaid, and they expect you to get your own funding. So you can either approach it by, like career fairs, like how it happened for me, or you could independently write to organizations that you're interested in or whose work interests you. And you can tell them that, this is an application that will come up and it will give me funding to work, and I'm really interested in your work. So can we discuss this, or how do I go about it? And you can start a dialogue on that ground. And I think it's a great opportunity to intern at a place which otherwise does not give you a stipend. And yeah, I think really it just depends on what area of law you're interested in, international law you're interested in, and which organization is working in that area, and what about their work excites you, and whether how responsive they are. They may not be responsive at all, and so you just want to keep like some options open, and like I said, start the process a little early on, maybe 6 months in advance, so that you could have contacted 2 3 organizations and really discussed different aspects of the application with each of them, and then you can just pick for yourself and see what works.
All right. I think another very interesting follow up with respect to sponsoring organizations is, would it be all right if an applicant is applying with just a proposed list of possible sponsoring organizations, but there's not an organization that has yet agreed on paper? Would they still be able to apply for the fellowship?
So I don't think so, because the application package requires you to have a letter from the sponsoring organization saying that they are willing to have you on board. So I don't think you'd be able to apply. And like I said, the process is a little opaque. So once you do submit your application, you don't really hear back from them till the results are out. And I don't really know if people who applied and did not get selected got a mail saying that their application was unsuccessful, even. So I wouldn't take that risk, and I would make sure that all the aspects of my application are complete, including the letter of sponsorship.
All right. So I think another very interesting question is that, given that the theme of the fellowship is international law and the project has to be a sub theme under international law, is there any trend that you have noticed where applications probably get accepted more when they're dealing with one particular aspect of international law, or is it just very, very random and it's just based on the application?
I think the only trend I can say I have definitively noticed in the applications over the years is that a lot of the applications are human rights focused. So it can be any area of human rights in international law. And I think that generally is something which is looked upon really favorably. I personally haven't come across any applications on international criminal law, but I do think that they are looked at very, very favorably. I know that there have been a couple of awards made to people who want to work in the area of refugee rights and humanitarian law as well. So, those I think broadly, if I can call it a trend, yeah, are the areas of international law that have been, yeah, looked at favorably or have really converted to fellowships, if I can say that. Just Abhishek, I wanted to go back to your previous question actually about sponsoring organizations. And I don't know if anybody's already asked this question, but something to also keep in mind is when you think of sponsoring, also think of what you might need in terms of like a sponsoring visa to be able to work, especially if you're not applying in India. So the way that it worked out for me was that I was on an extended visa after my LLM degree, and so I had sort of the legal authority to work in the US. And with that backdrop, I think everything else sort of fell in place. And if you apply for like an internship or something of that sort, I really don't know what the work authorization looks like for that. So that's also something you want to keep in mind. And if there are any any monetary sort of implications, to get that kind of authorization, then you want to budget for that as well. And you also want to just research that very well, and you want to be able to definitively show that, yes, I will have the authorization to work on this by the time that I get the fellowship, or by the time that I do start my internship or start working on the project or whatever. So that's also something you want to keep in mind. And if there is like an application fee to get that kind of a visa, then you want to budget that as well.
All right. So I think my next question is a particularly very, very common question that I think that comes up with almost every single application that you have post your first degree. And since there's a requirement of a CV slash resume, the question is, what exactly would a good resume be for this particular fellowship? Would it be something where you're showing a lot of mooting experience in international law? Would it be something where you're showing a lot of publications in international law, or just a general interest towards the idea that you're trying to work towards in your project?
So honestly, I think it's just a general sort of curiosity or interest in the area that you want to work on, or like how I gave my own example that I had done women's rights work in India before I left for my LLM, and then I wanted to explore how women's rights can be more intersectional, and really how that plays out in the international setting rather is what I was curious about. And I can tell you for a fact that I have not been very academically inclined, in the sense that I don't have a good record of publications on my CV. However, I do have solid work experience on my CV. And I think maybe that's what worked for me. I really can't say. I also didn't have a lot of mooting experience because, again, like, just so happened that I wasn't very active when I was in campus or center in the mooting circuit. So I really don't know what will work out, but I think it helps to show as much experience or inclination or engagement with international law as you possibly can. But I think till the time they don't really see who you are as a person and what really ignites your creativity or ignites your curiosity to work on this particular project with this particular organization, it may not really sit well together. So, you just want to be thinking about that a little bit strategically, and you can demonstrate it through exposure or experience mooting. You could demonstrate it through publications. You could demonstrate it through a record of internships. You could demonstrate it through any kind of teaching assistantship that you've done. It really could be anything. It could even be like a non-law related volunteer experience that you have, or a non-law related fellowship that you did. It could be anything, but just want to be thinking about how that sort of feeds into your curiosity, and how that feeds into the motivation for you wanting to do this project, and then how it ties up with your long-term goals and things like that. So those are the things you want to be thinking about while structuring your resume. But can't definitively say that having mooting experience or a record of publications is helpful, because to be very honest, that wasn't part of my resume.
All right. So I think my next question is I think particularly with respect to if and when somebody has already received the fellowship. So the question is, firstly, is it a part-time fellowship or a full-time fellowship? And like, can we do something on the side once awarded the fellowship? And I think the follow-up question goes that if we are given this fellowship, then how taxing is it really in terms of, let's say, time? And can you really engage in other activities or other degrees simultaneously?
So that's a really good question, actually. I think the application form or the application process really doesn't say anything about whether or not this is a full time engagement. It really depends on what you agree with your sponsoring organization. I think it just makes more sense to do it as like a full time thing, whether it's an internship or a long term, fellowship. So for me, it was a long-term fellowship, and that meant that every day I went to work from 9 to 5, and did my research, did my writing, and whatever else. But the rest of the time really was free for me to use in whatever way I wanted, whether it was networking or whether it was just traveling or just exploring, areas, or really I could use it in any way. And as a matter of fact, for some part of the fellowship, I was working part time for my current organization in India. It did, I mean, and really, again, I think it depends on the kind of work that you plan for yourself with your organization, and how taxing that work is, and what that time commitment looks like. Um, I mean, I really won't be able to say whether or not the fellowship in itself is taxing. It depends entirely on the project that you make for yourself, and the agreed number of hours that you'll be working on that project. um, there was no sort of agreed number of hours that I would be working on my project, but it was a full time engagement for me. But I was still able to take out time to work on other things on the side. So definitely you can do that, but with the caveat that it really depends on the expectations and the work that you have planned for yourself.
Okay, so I think the next question is particularly very, very interesting because the whole application seems to be very silent on this. And that is again going back to the sponsoring organization point. Let us say that there is an individual who is planning to start his own organization or start his own project on his own or in collaboration with a few of his friends or professors. In that situation, how exactly does the whole question of sponsoring organization work? And in such a situation, can he or she still be awarded a fellowship for that kind of a project?
That's actually a very interesting question, which I really have no straight answer for. If I remember correctly, the application package says something to the effect that if you, as an individual, want to do field work, then those kind of cases are not eligible. But it doesn't say anything about applying in a group or applying as an organization. I do think it would be tough to get a fellowship like that, because, like, this is a micro grant for students and young professionals who have some sort of like affiliation, if I can say that, either through an organization or with an academic institution. So I think it would be difficult, and there are like other ways to get funding for an organization that you set up. And there are a lot of funds out there that like specifically promote, encourage new or young organizations. So I'm really not sure how it would work out. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think it might be possible, but there isn't really anything that says a hard no on it.
Okay. So I think my next question is fairly, very, very general and not specific to this fellowship again. So obviously, this fellowship does require a lot of intensive research work if and when you do get the fellowship. So the question is, how can a law student, let's say somebody enrolled in a 3 or a 5 year LLB, actually assess that they would be able to work in such a rigorous environment with the kind of expectations that this fellowship holds? Are there any particular internships that they should do to be sure that this is something they'll be able to pull off in the long run, or any other suggestions that you might have?
So I don't think that this fellowship expects you to be researching a lot. So, like I said, you can design your own project, and that project could be anything. It could be, going to a certain specific area, collecting some evidence from that area to, further a particular argument in international law. So, it really could be anything that you want it to be, and really you can go all out and be as creative as you like. But at the same time, making sure that the organization that is sponsoring you is on board with it and thinks that it's feasible and helpful to them and also for international law in general. So I don't necessarily think that it's very research heavy. But I think that if it is like a short term engagement and you only have the ASIL fellowship as as like the prime source of funding, like there is no source of funding, you only have USD 2000. And I think with that kind of money, like traveling may be difficult. So desk research then becomes the best sort of project proposal that you can think of. Or it could also be like, say you're in Delhi and your project revolves around going to UN offices in Delhi and really figuring out how international law works out in India and what the implementation looks like and stuff like that. You may not really, you'll still be traveling. Sorry for that. There's a plane passing by, so yeah, sorry for that. So you might still be traveling, but locally in and around Delhi, and it doesn't cost a lot, so you'll still be able to do that. So yeah, it really depends on the kind of project you make. I don't think it's very research heavy necessarily. I designed a project that focused on research because I wanted to focus on my writing skills. And I also wanted to focus a little bit on international legal advocacy, which I didn't have a lot of exposure to. So that's the reason why I designed my project focusing on research and a little bit of advocacy. But it doesn't have to be like that for everybody, very honestly. So it really depends on what you make out of it. But if you do generally want more research experience, then I think it's a good idea to start with your professors, take up research assignments with them, for them, work with clinics where research is, like a big part of the work of the clinic. And those are just within the law school. You could also, outside the law school, work with organizations that are very writing heavy. So I believe Vidhi is one of them. You could also look at some legal content websites. You could also look at internships with internships that sort of expose you to the parliamentary system. So I think working with the Center for Legislative Policy and Research. I may be confusing the names, but happy to look it up later. But yeah, like any kind of internship which exposes you to the parliamentary system, or something that helps you prepare a little bit, or gives you a little bit of inclination of what the LAMP fellowship might look like, could also be a good idea. Something that an internship with a dev sector organization could also work, because there's a lot of writing work that happens there too. So those would just be the kind of internships that I would suggest in that case. And of course, you could also just write a paper under the guidance of your professor or any of your peers who've done it before. So if research is the skill that you're looking to develop, then you develop a project that focuses on that. If it is advocacy that you're looking to develop, then you design a project that focuses on advocacy skills and you just design a budget accordingly.
All right. I think I've already asked too many questions, so I think I'm just going to restrict myself to two more.
Okay,
So,
sure.
one very interesting question, and this is because you spoke a lot about how this whole fellowship helps you with networking. So, I just wanted to ask you, apart from networking and also the research project that you've taken up itself, what are the other new opportunities that this fellowship actually opens up? Let's say in the sphere of international law.
So I think networking, like I mentioned, is one of them. But really, being a part of the ASIL network, I think in itself is a really great thing. So the ASIL website gives you access to a couple of journals. It also gives you access to a job board where you can find jobs in international law. And I think I am still trying to find dedicated websites that have jobs on international law, and I haven't been able to come across a lot many of them, especially in India. So that can be like a good place to find jobs. And the jobs that are posted on the board are not limited to jobs that are based out of universities or jobs that are based out of like an INGO. They're like all across the board. There's stuff from WTO, there's stuff from International Bar Association, there's stuff from New York Bar Association, there's stuff from judges of international courts. So, really, like, it opens up a lot of opportunities. Like I said, you can also engage with working groups. I think this is something that I'm personally still trying to figure out how I can be more engaged and what I can do. Every now and then, I think ASIL will also reach out to you and ask you how you would want to engage. I mean, they won't directly ask you, but they'll probably send you like a Google form and sort of, ask you for suggestions or feedback through it. So, yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that the fellowship or the ASIL network will expose you to. I don't know if I've answered your question fully though.
No, that does answer it. That does
Okay.
answer it. All right. So I think that brings me to my last question, which is again, I think something that only comes into play once you've actually received the fellowship. And that is with respect to, so you receive a grant for a research proposal, but how exactly does how exactly does it work? Like how can you use those funds and how exactly does the administration actually monitor it?
So the administration really doesn't monitor how you spend the funds once you get them, because they also want to be giving you some kind of leeway to spend the funds in the way that suits you best. So in my case, I used the funding for covering my living expenses, my travel expenses. Yeah, like any kind of travel within New York that I had to do for my fellowship. So that's how I use the funding. The only thing that you have to do is send them like a write up of what you did with the funding that came about and what was the work that you did at the sponsoring organization once your fellowship is over. And they're not extremely like they won't really bother you with like bother you a lot once you get the money, which I guess is both good and bad in some ways. So you're free to spend it however you like, but I think it just helps to make a mental note of the fact that you do have to submit like a short note to them about how you spent the money and what work you did. So yeah, just want to be careful of that. But otherwise, there's no monitoring as such of how you spend the money.
All right, thanks a lot for that. I think that brings me to the end of the Q&A session. I don't think we have any other questions, but I would just like to thank you for taking the time out to come in and conduct this session. If you have any general tips or suggestions or any parting thoughts that you would want to make.
So I think it's a great opportunity for both students and young professionals to explore careers in international law. Even if it's a micro grant, like it can give you some type of exposure, and it can help you, like, really, I think for a student it can really help you decide whether or not international law is where you want to be. So definitely give it a shot. Think of something that excites you, make a proposal, get all your documents in order, start the process a little early so that you don't have any last minute panic, last minute struggles. I would also recommend looking up the past fellows, and if somebody's work excites you, just reach out to them and talk to them about it. You could also just ask them about the application process and their experience, or really anything else that you would like to ask them. And yeah, like, because especially because it's such a sort of opaque setting and there are no interviews. Everything is decided on the basis of the application package you sent and the documents that you send with it. I think it helps to talk to somebody who's been awarded the fellowship before about it. So yeah, just start early, think and be strategic, and talk to people who've got the fellowship before. And that's it. I think those are my parting thoughts.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Radhika. I think that was a very, very good session. And I think that's really helped a lot for those who are planning to consider taking up this fellowship or have some interest in international law. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you once again on behalf of Team Plant. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, and happy to help out and answer any kind of follow-up questions if people reach out to me. You could link them to my LinkedIn profile or give them my email ID, and I'd be happy to help take up any questions even after the session is over.